Hello, everybody. It is 3:50, so we've already lost 5 minutes. So we'll speak
even faster.
4% faster and make up the time here between now and 5 o'clock. Is everybody comfortable up there? You want to come up here? Okay, all right. So we're going to talk here about accessibility and captioning. I'm Mike Wassenaar. If we haven't met, I'm the president and CEO of ACM. ACM nationally has been doing a lot of work in this field for the last decade. Actually, we partnered with the FCC 10 years ago now to talk about captioning and accessible technology in PEG. And actually, at that time, that FCC was kind of impressed by the fact that web stream was like one of the most well-attended web stream they had ever had.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Specifically just because of the amount of interest that folks around the country had about accessibility issues, because of the mission of what we do. To my right is Mike Bradley of Bradley Werner in Minnesota. Mike has been working in telecommunications and public communications work, really, public communications law, working with municipalities and community media centers for more than 25 years. He was my attorney at one point. He is not my attorney now. That is not a reflection of his work.
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, just to be clear, that is not an endorsement nor
It's because he left the organization.
I left the organization. It's neither a reflection nor an endorsement of his work. But Mike actually has also worked with communities on accessibility issues, particularly as the law has been changing recently. So he'll have a chance to talk about that. Mm-hmm. And then, Pete, the most important question I have for you is the pronunciation of your last name.
Tufigno.
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 There you go.
Yeah, the GNO. That's
right.
Yeah, very, very important.
Yep.
So Pete works with Cablecast. Cablecast actually has been doing a lot of work in partnership with ACM. I really appreciate actually the work that our technology partners, both Telview and Cablecast, have been doing, specifically to be crafting products and solutions for communities and for our municipal partners in the wake of the Department of Justice's work on web accessibility for Title II entities that occurred in 2024. God, was it only a year ago?
Good.
Holy
the test.
cow, it was only a year ago. And I hate to say this, Pete, but I'm to blame because I was the person who called Steve Israelski when the DOJ put out their notifications. So I'm sorry.
Apology accepted.
Yeah, but it's very, very important work, and I think there's all sorts of questions about like what the work means now as the administration changes. But also I think there's just some implications that we have in terms of like how we reach our audiences, how we work with different groups of people, and how we think about accessibility in our work, particularly as we're working in multimedia environments. For long, long periods of time, we just worked in cable. And so that defined how we saw the world, and specifically how we interfaced with folks. But particularly as we work in multi-channel environments, we work in streaming environments, it's important to be thinking about accessibility to be able to make sure that we have the ability to be able to make meaning with everyone in our community. As I think about a lot of the work, it's really mission related, not what does the federal government tell us we have to be doing. It actually talks about how we think about other people interface with our communications and how we actually communicate with people to make meaning. And I think that's one of the things I'm not going to give away your presentation too much here. One of the things I appreciate about Cablecast is that they've been really thinking about how these web standards affect how people use their products or can't use their products. And I think it's actually been really illuminating for you guys as you're kind of going through the process and discovering all sorts of things that you had assumed.
Right.
But because you're actually getting down to brass tacks about like how people interface with products on the web and how people can and cannot use those products, it actually makes you a better company, I think. So that's neither of these guys are getting endorsements from me today, but Even though it sounds like
I
an
know,
endorsement.
you're
I
getting
like,
cash.
I like his work, I like his
It's-
work, I like
okay,
their
okay.
work. Okay, fine. All right.
You know,
So-
I really enjoy speaking with Mike on this topic particularly, although I think maybe we like talking about other topics more, but
We'll talk about Man City and Arsenal later. Yeah, so, yeah.
so, but what I really appreciate about Mike when we talk about accessibility is he's so good at talking about what are some of the benefits of adopting some of these technologies and why it's actually a good thing, because a lot of times you'll talk to folks and they're kind of more concerned about cost and, you know, and the requirements. As the lawyer of the group, I'm kind of concerned about, well, what do we have to do? But Mike is able to really talk about, well, why some of these things aren't so bad and they can be really positive for your community and your organizations.
Yeah, and just kind of as a preview for one of my perspectives here, even though we have a new administration, I don't think we're going to start ripping up all of the curb cuts in America.
Correct. Yeah. Right.
So, and the reason why those curb cuts exist is because of the ADA, which was actually a law passed more than 30 years ago now.
That's right.
So there's civic benefit to being able to actually reach everybody with our work. And so that's kind of why I want to support both these guys as they talk about ADA accessibility and what it means for our work. So
Yeah, so let's jump into it.
Let's go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mike.
So, you know, I'll have some slides that talk about some of the legal things, and I think, and Mike will chime in as we go along, because there's some policy things in there as well. And then Pete will follow up, and he'll really, I think, give us some really nice examples of what technologies are out there and how we can meet those needs moving forward, and maybe give some examples of what maybe an ADA audit kind of could look like and how you kind of go about addressing findings and such as you move along. Just some real basics to start off with on the ADA. It does apply to all cities. I believe it also applies to agencies that are supporting cities, including nonprofits. And even if I'm incorrect in that belief, I think that any nonprofit that is serving a local government with access channels really has an interest in making sure that whatever they're doing is compliant with the ADA for municipalities, because that's your ultimate client. It applies to internet streaming. That is a huge subject of litigation, as we'll go over. The ADA does require doing due diligence on what you're doing, so you need to make sure you're looking at how you're doing all of the communications with the public, and making sure that your actions are compliant with the ADA. And as Mike mentioned, there's some FCC rules as well as ADA rules when it comes to captioning. Local governments and access organizations are largely exempt from those rules, with some minor exceptions, and one of those is a reporting requirement. And Mike, talk about that, because that's kind of cool.
So it's now 8 years ago.
Yes.
The FCC issued an order talking about who was responsible for captioning on all video channels in the United States. And I made the mistake of reading the order. I called up the Consumer Affairs Bureau and I said, hey, gee, it says that all video producers in the United States have to register with the federal government once a year and explain their exemption status.
Yeah.
Do you understand the way your rule is written? That would mean that every Girl Scout troop producing a program on CMAC would actually have to register with the federal government once a year. Every religious organization on an access channel have to register with the federal government. And they had thought that every video production that happens in the United States is a corporate enterprise with a legal clearance team, right? Or alternatively, an owned and operated broadcaster, right? With a legal team. They forgot that there's like a class of cable channels in the United States that are civically based, publicly based, educationally based, and there's not like a huge legal team for legal rights compliance issues that, say, the local whittling club has as they do public access work. So initially they said, gee, write us a letter. So I wrote them a letter. And then they say, gee, make a petition. So I made the mistake of putting a petition together. And then a rulemaking commenced. And then there was a new chairman put in place.
Yes.
And Rip Van Winkle went to sleep for 4 years. And then the new chairman was put in place, and then Rip Van Winkle woke up after 4 years. And then they started taking public comments on the rulemaking that they had asked for.
Yeah.
Right? I just wanted to make sure that Girl Scouts could produce video and not have to register with the federal government. That's all I wanted. They had asked for the petition. Okay? It took the Rosenworcel FCC 3.5 years to issue a notice of proposed rulemaking in August of last year. 8 years after that initial phone call, in which they said that I was correct.
Yes.
And that Girl Scouts don't have to register with the federal government. They agreed. And they wanted more comment. Okay? Which they did. And everyone agreed with the position that we had outlined at ACM. All disability rights organizations that agreed with us. The cable industry agreed with us. Yes, you do not want to have public access producers registering with the federal government, but you do want to have consumers actually make complaints correctly. One of our members, Peabody Community Television in Peabody, Massachusetts, has gotten a complaint filed with the FCC for viewers in San Francisco who watch Peacock. Oh, you'll appreciate that, Jack. There was actually a San Francisco resident who complained to the FCC about captioning on Peacock. And of course, it went to Peabody, Massachusetts. And basically, Peabody had to deal with a complaint about one of your viewers. You know, that's how kind of screwed up the FCC's process is. We had an election in November. There's a new FCC chair.
There is. Yep.
Rip Van Winkle's gone back to sleep. I don't know if they will act again on the petition or not, and the rulemaking that was promulgated by the Rosenworcel FCC. I don't know if they are going to eliminate the Federal Registry for consumer complaints, because the FCC doesn't seem to be much interested in consumer complaints.
Yep.
But it's been a long, strange trap. So the thing that's interesting is that registry exists for all commercial channels. PEG channels have not been registering by the statutory date of the order, which is July 1st of every year. They haven't been doing that since July of 2016 when the order was put in place. I don't think they're going to come after you for not registering for something that they don't care about. I would love it if actually the issue was resolved, just because of the amount of time I've spent dealing with the FCC on this issue. But I was the person who gave them a call, so I guess this is my dumb fault for trying to make sure that gospel organizations don't have to register with the federal government.
8 short years ago.
8 short
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah.
And I don't think they ever got the online thing.
No,
Yeah. So there was another requirement in that FCC rulemaking that Mike was talking about from 8 years ago, that the FCC would be implementing shortly an online registration
Oh,
system.
the online
Or
the online registration exists for commercial channels,
yeah.
but they've never required all video producers in America to be a part of it.
Okay.
So wait and see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I kind of mentioned this before, but ADA lawsuits are at an all-time high, and as you can see, there's been over 4,000 cases filed in 2024. The vast majority of those are in California, just so you know. So it's particularly relevant in California when we're talking about ADA compliance. And those are only the cases filed. That doesn't include the cases where somebody says, hey, you're violating this and you should pay me now, type of a situation. So,
And to be clear, under ADA is enforced both by the federal government under the Department of Justice.
yes, and
or
under
by
state laws too.
state laws as well.
Yes, and
So-
then they're
so-
becoming more and more popular as
So,
far as.
so that mean,
class
in
actions.
that would be a class action suit under like a state attorney general's office? Or is
No, it would be, by
Like
a class
private
action attorney, yeah.
Private action.
Yeah,
So this is the thing
looking for dough.
that should be important to note, especially we deal with like the Trump administration, that right of private action still continues regardless of whether or not there's a civil rights department.
Right. Okay, so what you really need to know is that there's been new rules that were issued by the Department of Justice for web content and mobile apps. And those were just released last April, okay? And so if you want slides, well, I'll make these slides available to you because pretty much everything you see with an underline, it has a link to it, so you can get all the information that you're looking for right off of these slides. So minimal amount of work for you to get the information that you need. And the Department of Justice released a fact sheet that's pretty helpful. But the bottom line is the stuff that you see in red. They're kind of in the middle in that you have to comply with the WCAG 2.1 standard from 2018. And the reason I put the from 2018 is because the WCAG standard has changed since 2018, but the DOJ rule relates to local governments complying with that particular standard, okay? So again, we have links, the underline there is a link right to those standards. There's also different levels of that particular standard, so it's the level AA standard that we have to comply with.
And I think Pete will talk a little bit more specifically about that.
Yeah, and show examples of how to comply. So that includes captioning for live programming. It also includes some audio description requirements. So, and it applies to more than just video. It applies to, what's on your web pages, as well as your video and in all of your apps as well if you have apps. Okay. Just recently, the department published some action steps. And so again, I have links to the action steps that you can take in the small entity compliance guide. It does literally like a 10-step process for coming into compliance with these new rules. So I really encourage you to look at all of those things. Some are pretty obvious, like, look at the law and see what it says, but but there's some other more substantive ones that you can look at as far as, how do you go about identifying content that needs to be, amended somehow or fixed somehow. How do you prioritize, different content, et cetera? How do you fix it?
And explain the small entity definition there, because I think there's like a 50,000 resident.
Yes, there's for compliance purposes, and I'll go over this in just a little bit, but there's deadlines for compliance. So for smaller entities under 50,000 people, there was a 3-year compliance window, and then for larger jurisdictions over 50,000, it's a 2-year window. And I have the exact dates here. It's like April 24th, 2026 for large jurisdictions, and then April 24th, 2027 for smaller ones. If you're in if you happen to be in a cable commission or a joint powers group, municipal joint powers or something like that, then you fall into that smaller category. Actually, you have 3 years for compliance. I think I'm getting that right. Okay, there are some exceptions to these new rules. So when you think about what's on your web pages, you'll see that there's some archived content. So the archived web content is an exception. So pre-existing PDFs that are, linked to your web page are exempt. Any content posted by third parties, and then there's some other exceptions for, password protected types of documents and things like that. And also pre-existing social media posts. So just know that there's some exceptions in there. And again, those are listed out in those documents that I linked you to before that. There are a lot of benefits for compliance, and I think this is really where Mike Wassenaar comes into, but some obvious and maybe some not so obvious, and some may not even be on the screen that Mike can talk to, but reducing your legal risks seems like an obvious one. You don't want to get sued, so you want to be in compliance with the new rules. But decreasing possible barriers in accessing city services or access services seems like it's probably obvious, but maybe it's not so obvious. I think maybe a not so obvious one is you may attract more users to your web pages or the city web pages, because actually some of these tools, as Pete will show, maybe makes the interfaces even more attractive to the user at the end of the day.
And sort of three other points I'd make just to kind of amplify what Mike's saying. One, search engine optimization occurs when you add data to websites. We often don't talk about this, but basically the ability for people to be able to find content increases when you add data. Okay, so that's a key aspect of this in terms of discoverability for key content for communities. Second, distracted viewing, I think, is the most increased viewing experience in America. If we think about like the attention economy, people are watching multiple screens, or they're watching screens in distracted environments. So to be able to reach people with content in the first place, you need to be providing extra graphic information, which we often don't think about. I mean, just because of the level of distraction that occurs, whether it be in a bar or at someone's home, or with like a double, triple screen environments for communities. So,
Present company included.
And then third, ixnay on the cell phone. Third, even though we're talking about disability, the number one growing population of folks with hearing loss are people like me. I'm 61. I ran a rock and roll club in the 1980s. As a person with tinnitus, I really benefit from the added information, particularly when I'm watching British sitcoms or something like that. But I would suggest to you that this is like a huge growing service population in all communities across America, and we need to be thinking about that in terms of like sort of the generational services that we're providing. Folks who need the assistance that may be short of self-identifying as being disabled is a huge population.
I'd say that a lot of the programs I watch, I have captioning turned on.
That's exactly correct.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly correct. So it's not just sort of like the perception of the perception issue with like how our attention spans are being trained, but it's also just kind of like as we're looking at like an aging population, assistive technology I think is going to be allowing us to be all living more productive lives. And I just think we need to be opening ourselves to be thinking about that in terms of our service to community. So this is my last substantive slide really, and that's just on how to comply with the new ADA rules, and just kind of some basics on how to comply. So just make sure that you're reviewing that new DOJ rule, and look at those standards. Use that link to the 10 steps that the DOJ just released earlier this year, and follow those. Talk to your vendors, like Pete and others that are here at the conference.
or that you're using, obviously, to make sure that you're going to be in a position to comply by the deadlines that are applicable to you. And then don't forget about partner sharing. There's some real ways that access organizations and local governments, particularly if they're close to one another, but maybe not even, you don't even have to be anymore, but just through internet technologies, you're able to, maybe you're able to, share some of the equipment that's used in one spot that has some of that captioning capability and share it with neighbors. So there might be some cost sharing opportunities there. And then finally, the deadline. I was close on the deadlines by memory, but anyway, April of 2026 and April of 2027.
One other point on that partner opportunity I point out is that I think this is like a great opportunity to be building partnerships if you don't have already, particularly with local civil rights commissions and local and state disability commissions. The favorite story I have about this is in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, which is a small town in western Massachusetts that basically had a complaint about captioning arising from the Civil Rights Commission. The access provider, who is a nonprofit that serves the city with meetings coverage, basically said, yes, we can do this. It's going to cost us $5,000 a year in the operating costs. Technology we can cover. $5,000 in operating costs we don't have. Pittsfield has devoted parking revenue specifically to expand meeting coverage captioning.
Wow.
And it's because the partnership. It's like, okay, you want to be able to reach more people, let's find resources to be able to do that. The access provider was able to have allies in the Civil Rights Commission, hugely powerful in a small town, to be able to advocate specifically for a revenue stream to be able to support.
Oh, nice.
So next time you're in Pittsfield, feed the meter, and that'll help them with their captioning.
Well, and your story just reminded me of another partnership opportunity, and that was an access organization partnering with, I think it was PBS, where PBS paid the access organization, and I'm sure they're a Pete client actually, and it was really cool what they were doing. It was, I think, the governor's State of the State address, and they were taking the feed of the governor's State of the State address. They were sending that to the access organization, and the access organization had 2 rooms, one that was used to caption in Hmong, the Hmong language, and the other in Spanish, I think, or something, or maybe they were sign language. Anyway, what they were doing is they were taking the governor feed. It was coming back to the access organization. The access organization was splicing in this extra captioning, and then it was getting spit out to go to the whole.
Well, and the reason
audience.
why the PBS entity is doing that is because it's cheaper for them to support the access organization doing that than doing it in-house.
Yes.
And they have a broadcasting obligation to serve the public in a way that the access organization may not. So it ends up being a win-win.
So anyway, those partner opportunities are out there. That's well, that is my presentation. Oh, that's the best one though, really. Yeah.
That's a nice headshot.
Wasn't that nice?
That's nice.
Yeah,
That's
thank
nice.
you.
All right, let's turn over to Pete, and he's gonna walk us through some things.
Yeah, see if we can get this going.
One question,
Yeah.
Mike. So the DOJ mandate isn't aimed at organizations like ours, but at municipalities, right? It's they're on the hook for getting this done.
Well,
If we're doing sort of their meetings.
yeah, well, and if you're programming their channels and which
They're your
probably
client.
are, and you're receiving public money from the city,
I mean-
you're both on the hook, in my opinion.
But there's a good argument there when you go to your city fathers, this applies to you. This is not sort of aimed local media center.
Well, they have to comply
It's
with
for
the ADA, so it's
yeah.
for their own good
Yeah.
that you're doing that for them. It's a real benefit to
Yeah.
the city.
So it's like every state and local government in the United States. So it'd be any county, any municipality, and the states themselves actually have to be in compliance with the order. Yeah, but yeah, I think the order specifically talks about you can't like shove it off onto a service provider.
No, it's,
That's that entity's responsibility.
right, yep. And that's why it'll be important for you to talk to your vendors too, to make sure that, when you have contracts with your vendors, make sure that you're making sure that they're providing you what you need to be in compliance.
Mike, you mentioned local and state civil rights organizations to look at potentially as a partner, and then you mentioned another, I can't remember what it was, I was trying to have it from my notes. You said something else about local and state. Was it disability organizations, or you mentioned two different things. One was civil rights. And then
Disability rights. Sometimes states will codify different types of commissions. So like, again, we don't mean to dominate, but Minnesota's a great place. Minnesota basically has both the Civil Rights Commission, and then it also has like multiple other commissions for supporting the lived experience of Minnesotans. So there's like a Disability Rights Commission, there's different commissions of color that have gone back to like the 1960s. And then very often counties and local government municipalities will have their own commissions. So it really depends upon, what the enacting legislation in your state, and then also what the sort of traditions are, because you may have a municipality that has like a local commission. I know counties will sometimes have it because they do social. Counties are social service agents in most states, so they will have commissions about fairness and civil rights protections for community services that they provide. Those are all like, I think, natural partners to be thinking about, separate from even private civil rights organizations or private activist organizations that I think would be interested in supporting that work. When I was in St. Paul, there were a number of folks in the disability rights community that were activists at the state capitol, because basically that's what you do in St. Paul. You go up to the Capitol all the time. But they ended up being huge advocates for our work that we did with like the city, for example. So I just think that there's like natural partners that you can be building alliances with.
I feel like this is a Minnesota panel up here, isn't it?
Well, that's why, it's so good, yeah.
Oh, okay. That's why it's so good.
That's
why it's so good.
Remember, we rode the Sam Darnold train earlier this year, and anyway,
For a
go
little
ahead.
bit.
Yeah, for a little bit.
And so I appreciate, like, at the very beginning, you kind of mentioned, like, the other organizations that have to also follow this. And so I just want to make sure that that's pretty clear. That state and local governments that contract with these other entities to provide the public services, like, also have to make sure that those contractors are following Title II. And so their example in here, and there's a link down at the bottom if you squint. It's just like nonprofit organizations that run drug treatment programs on behalf of that state agency also have to follow these kind of guidelines. So it's just something to be aware of.
Transportation agencies. Often
Yep.
that's a classic one. The nonprofits actually provide transportation for local government across the United States. They have to comply. Those
Yep.
types of things.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's three different levels. AA is kind of what we'll spend the most of the time talking about today. That's kind of the target. But really, there's an A where people must comply. Should is what we'll talk about, and then may. I've got kind of three different examples here. The first is, as one of the musts, is just like a use of color. So on websites that are publicly available, that people can access, color is a must to kind of meet those qualifications.
Because people are colorblind.
There are people that are colorblind. Yeah.
Right.
For sure, that's a big part of it. And then contrast minimums. There's a couple neat calculators out there that can kind of help with websites. I'll talk about those in a little bit, just to make sure that you guys are in compliance. Again, this is AA. And then an example of the AAA is just sign language. So not a hard requirement, not as of today anyway. Just something else to kind of be aware of as we look at these kind of 3 different tiers that are out there.
So just to kind of give you, just to kind of go down even further on this, Pete. So if the DOJ had said you must have AAA level, that would require everybody to have sign language.
Right. Right.
Right. So what they
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So they said you must have the lowest level of conformity. You should have the second level of conformity, which is going to be, I think it's going to be interesting in some respects for some things. You'll talk about that, I
Yep.
know.
Yep.
And then you may go all the way if you want. And I know that there are some communities that have sign language provision because a significant number of people who are not literate who use sign language, right? So.
Yeah, I should say that I'm not a lawyer, not an attorney. So like these words are nice and
Yeah.
fuzzy.
Yeah.
Yep. So there's a lot there, though. There are a lot of requirements. What we found is that there's a few kind of tools that are out there, some that are free, which we'll talk about to varying levels of success or varying levels of awesomeness. The first one that we'll talk about is Wave. Are you guys familiar with this? This one, yeah, okay, some nodding heads. That's good. This is one that we used just to do some initial testing on ours. We found that this catches about 30 or 40% of mistakes on websites, so not all of them. Of the details of the ones that we've run, a lot of these were just kind of code errors, no alternative text. So not super proud of the first time we ran our public site through this. But you'll see that I think one of the examples here is like, I don't know, there were 86 or some odd errors, if you will, but it was just related to one kind of problem that we had on our site historically that we fixed. And then the other one is the ARC toolkit. Is anyone familiar with this? I was actually on a phone call earlier today and someone said, oh, I use a tool for that. And after some back and forth, this is what they were using. So comical that it was in there. Also another good option is kind of a round one to kind of look at your websites and look at data that you guys are pushing out. And the price is right? Those two are kind of free solutions. So I'll talk just briefly about what Cablecast, kind of how we did some things and what is it that we were doing. The first was, like I said, just ran through that evaluation tool. Here's where that 89 number I said came from. We had for sure a lot of errors. Some of them were contrast, some alternative text. We'll talk a little bit more of those in a minute. And then the other big thing that we saw was the thumbnails that we have on our site, or that customers can have as like title graphics, things like that, that they can't have words on them, right? Unless it's absolutely necessary. And I'll get into like the exact language that it's in there, but just something to be aware of because tools like screen readers can't see that, can't read that information. So it's something to be cognizant of. So what we did is we rebuilt our public website. So a lot of our customers that are using that to view their streaming content and scheduling content, rebuilt that. We did get an independent expert audit/reviewer to look at that, paid a few dollars to get someone to go through that with us. And at the end of the day, kind of spoiler alert, we did get our VPAT, which is the voluntary product assessment. That's available and out there for sharing. So it's on our website if you guys want to. If you're super excited about reading legal documentation, it's out there. But there's for sure a lot of good information that's in there that you can check out.
So just to be clear about this basically is a way to build confidence as a contractor and a partner with both nonprofits and municipalities, so that the services you provide are in compliance.
Right. Yeah. And so one of the examples I have down here. Is that if you're going out to RFP for a playout system or whatever it might be, is just to say, hey, one of the requirements here is that the vendor needs to submit their VPAT documentation. It's almost like a safeguard. It's like a report card.
And actually, the DOJ contemplates, frankly, that Title II entities would actually have to be dealing with vendors that
Yes,
know
absolutely.
the law.
Yeah.
right? So that's a sort of compliance issue. Is it's not like you just get Fred from down the way.
Sign off on it,
Yeah,
yeah.
and Fred took care of it for us. Yeah, I mean, DOJ says you have to do due diligence to make sure that your contractors know what they're doing.
Yep. Yeah, and because again, as part of the compliance, like I started with, like they have to, like we also have these requirements, and if you guys are working and using our public website, like it needs to be compatible.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, yeah. So that's also a good thing to add to RFPs, like I said. And then this is annual, so it's not like the one time Fred signs off on it. It's just an annual thing that we have to go back. That was his name, right?
Fred,
Yeah.
down the corner.
It's
Yeah.
it's an annual thing that we have to go back to, and then resubmit, make changes if needed. So as far as what we did is we shopped around for a few vendors. Prices were between $13,000 and $30,000, so a big chunk to have this work done. And it just depends on the size of the site or the size of the thing that are being looked at. And it just took a couple months. What we found is that the manual testing is the key, right? So the few examples that I started with are great for just the automatic, have computers look at computer things and do their best. But at the end of the day, it's really getting someone to dig in to find the things that those automated programs can't find. And then I mentioned the VPAT, which we got done. That's kind of the template to get things started. Lots of requirements there. Again, feel free to check it out on our site to read more about it. And then alongside that is the ACR, which is really like the report card of how do things look on the VPAT. Because a lot of it's subject to interpretation. This is a good way to kind of get a high-level glance at it, to look at things. I didn't make this presentation, but there's there's a few GIFs coming up, so I didn't know you could do that in PowerPoint or in Sheets. So the things, as you guys kind of go through your journey, just a few things that you guys might run into. Starting with easy, we'll work our way down to things that are not so easy. These are things that we put into our software because of the audit that we did, right? The first is just alternative text. So we built that right into a show record in our platform, but the ability just to have content that's out there in multiple different formats. Our public website, we adjusted a lot of the contrast minimums on there to meet the AA requirement. But we also have, specific to our software, the ability to brand that yourselves, right? So you guys could come in and say, I want, my logo is light gray and darker gray, which would then break this, right? It just wouldn't be compatible. So some of the second free tool that I mentioned also has a cool contrast calculator in there too, so be aware of that. And then we added quite a bit to help with screen readers, right? I don't know if you guys have ever used those or turned them on. It's interesting to kind of spend a moment, like if that's how you had to bring content, if that's how you were absorbing content, is through screen readers. It's just an interesting exercise to go through. But we added a lot about, with labels, kind of the way that things are sorted on the back end of the website, so things are reading in the correct order for those screen readers. Spent some time doing this. It's
Does
kind of a
everyone
bigger
know what a
project.
screen reader is? Yes?
Yeah.
Do you know why you'd want a screen reader?
You can't read through.
Correct. You have low visual acuity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it may not be someone who's blind, but it's someone who has some type of low visual acuity that and basically will use the reader. And that gets back to the GIF problem you're talking about. I had never heard this before.
Right.
We have the text on the GIF.
Yeah.
And what's the problem that causes? That basically, the reader goes nuts. I mean, the reader basically starts reading the text on the GIF and
Right.
reads it over and over again. or
Especially
something?
cat GIFs.
The cat
yeah,
GIFs.
I don't know how I think each screen reader is a little different, but I do know that, like, specific to images, it just can't, the screen reader's not, it's just seeing a picture, right? It's seeing a PNG or a
This
JPEG
is a
and
buzz.
skipping it.
This is
Yeah.
a typing cat.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
cat is still typing.
The cat is still
Yeah,
typing.
right.
Yeah.
So AA, I mentioned this earlier, level AA says that text should not be presented as part of an image unless it's absolutely necessary. So here, like a Merry Christmas one down at the bottom, your town city council meeting, things to for sure be aware of as you're choosing thumbnails or other things for your website. And that they're just saying real text should be used. So obviously it can be resized if we zoom in or zoom out, which is part of accessibility, but also the screen readers.
So you have a picture, and then underneath the picture, you can put something, some text.
Some
and then
alternative
that
text,
works.
yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And then name role value, we're getting kind of deeper into the weeds here. This is level A, so this is a must. But just any interactive elements of the web page, like buttons and fields, need to provide clear information about their intent and purpose, right? So it's not just a search box, it's a box that says search, right? Or here it's search by title. I don't have my glasses on, but just very descriptive on those kinds of things. Not necessarily just a little magnifying glass icon, right? But let's say what that is, so it can be picked up by these other tools. So that's the kind of the first half, the easier ones. Some of the more difficult ones we got into is about descriptive audio. So obviously captioning is out there. Descriptive audio can be expensive, right?
So we need to explain something. The Title II, the AA requirement is that pre-recorded motion media have descriptive audio.
Yeah.
Which would mean if who does pre-recorded media and plays it back on a platform?
Everybody.
Everybody.
doesn't? Yeah.
How many have descriptive audio in one of those channels? Nobody. It's never been a requirement on cable. It will be a requirement, particularly for municipalities.
Yes.
And I think it's an open question how this gets paid for. I think this one is the biggest, the hardest, biggest thing that I see. And you're not alone in sort of like thinking it's hard. There's other vendors. There's competitors who don't know
It's
what the
hard.
hell.
It's hard,
Don't
yeah.
because literally I think the cost per minute of doing descriptive audio is, I mean, it's insane actually.
Yeah, like
It-
16 bucks is my example, 14
Yeah.
to 16 bucks. Like that's
Yeah.
real money.
Yeah.
Right. Per minute. Yeah, not per hour, per minute.
Yeah.
So a good example of like non-compliance would be like someone's just showing how to use software, or they're just clicking through. There's no audio. It's just silent, right? So that would be non-compliant. And then like the compliance example here is like a cooking show where the chef is up there talking about all the things they're doing. Right now I'm going to add this, stir that, 375 for 20 minutes. As they talk through it, that's the descriptive audio. And I'm interested to hear your feedback on this one. I heard that if you have a text transcript, that audio description is not required. And that kind of hit me. I was like, is that true? Because I feel like
a
it's...
text transcript that could be read then, maybe, is that what?
How could that be true?
I don't know.
Yeah, it could be. That's how I flagged it. I was like, I got to Google it.
I don't know. How's that?
I mean, a screen reader would be able to read it.
Yeah.
Right?
That's
It
what
could
I'm
be
thinking.
read.
That's
Yeah.
the only thing that I
But
can think of.
there's a class of people who are, I mean, so think about this. This is motion media.
Mm-hmm.
You're telling me then you'd have a transcript that has descriptive terms about the actions within the motion media? Not just the, because that's not a transcript. That ends up being like a screenplay.
Right,
You're telling,
right.
that can't be correct.
That's what I thought. That's why I was like, I got to get feedback on this. So worth a little more.
I think
due
that
I
diligence.
could see it working in certain programs, but not all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you pointed
Yeah.
one right out.
Right.
Way.
It's subject to further investigation. All right, that's an
Yeah.
interesting question.
Yeah.
I-
Something to
Does
ponder.
effort count for anything?
I'm sure what?
Good faith effort, just an attempt is made to give the description.
I think effort counts, not good faith effort. Effort counts. Because particularly under ADA, there's a standard of effective communication that says that you actually have to plan things out and know what the costs are, and then determine whether or not the costs are, I can't remember the precise term of are.
Infeasible, isn't it?
Yeah, unfeasible. Are the costs unfeasible, or
Yeah.
would substantially alter the service? So that's a standard that still pertains,
It does.
right? So what that I think means is that by 2027, for a small entity, you'll have to assess whether or not it's economically feasible to do descriptive audio
Yeah.
for video on demand service.
But the key is you did that due diligence.
You got-
It's in writing.
You got
You figured out
pricing.
what the, yes.
You got pricing for your system. You determined how many hours of VOD you do a year
Yes.
on your platform. You
Yeah.
scoped out what
Times $16 a minute.
what the cost would be with not just sort of like Mickey Mouse vendors or imaginary guys like my guy Fred down the corner. It has to be like real quotes from people who actually provide the service, right? And then you can say, well, it's not economically feasible. But even then, it can't be like Joe Blow in the department. It has to be someone with some sort of budgetary authority within the Title II entity. So, to your point, to your example, Rory, it would be like a budget director within the county that you partner with. They would have to say, oh, this is not economically feasible. So there's going to have to be a political process that you do as you do this with your partners.
And my understanding is it's not a one-time thing either. That you can say it's just not feasible, right? 2027 is not feasible.
Well,
You have to annually.
It is ongoing,
I think
yes.
the
Yes.
suggestion that Pete gives implicitly, not, you don't explicitly say this, but you're going to check compliance once a year
Yeah,
for your
the
products.
VPAT, yeah, it's
for
a
his
requirement, yeah,
products that
yeah.
he's selling. I think what that means is that you should have a check-in once a year about what compliance looks like for either your government partners or for your services yourself. And that means part of your budget planning. And I think that means that you should be planning, this should be part of your regular budget planning cycle. And it shouldn't be like a surprise to someone once the deadline pops up.
Yeah, if not annually, regularly.
Yeah, regularly.
Yeah.
Because the other thing is that costs will change. We've
Yes.
Hopefully it comes down. But
well,
yeah,
and we've
costs
seen,
will
and certainly
change.
from a captioning standpoint, we've seen the cost of captioning per minute go down radically in the last decade. My hope is that that we see costs change for descriptive audio.
Yeah.
But descriptive audio isn't automated
Today.
Not yet.
today.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
all
Right.
like custom. It's literally like where we were with
No, there's-
captioning 15 years ago.
Yeah.
AI is going to have a big impact on that.
Yeah, and again, the disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer, but what's interesting about this snippet, that you don't have to read it all because you'll get dizzy, but it's really that an organization may still be considered compliant if its non-compliance has minimal impact and doesn't hinder individuals with disabilities. So it's just something that's more that kind of gray interpretation aspect.
Well, and actually, I think the more important thing here, Pete, is that, the spirit of ADA says that you should be responsive to local needs.
Yes, they take that into consideration.
Right. So,
There's been a complaint.
so if you know of populations in your community, you should actually have conversations with them to talk about their needs. And I think the thing that I think is a little strange is that we've been talking about information needs within PEG systems for 40 years. At no point did we actually have conversations with people who had disabilities about the technology that was needed, because that would have been a legitimate information need. And we could have actually rolled that into cable franchising. It never happened because it was never required by the FCC. It's a good opportunity to have that conversation with folks in your community, particularly if you know that there's like a large population of deaf speakers, for example, or a large population of the blind.
Yep.
There's communities we work with where there's schools of the blind, and they've been folks who go to the schools end up relocating locally. So there's like these clusters of consumers, with specific disabilities. You should be having conversations with those folks.
I think as I kind of wrap up here, a little bit about accessibility widgets. I'm sure you've all seen those in the corner of some websites. Is that a lot of those widgets are just going to look at the website itself, just like the free resources I talked about. And since they're automated, they're not able to get all the information we want, like videos, right? The accessibility widget isn't going to closed caption your video content. It's not going to touch images. It's not going to touch PDFs. So something to be aware of, that it can miss quite a bit. And then in conclusion, like just things that I think that you guys can do or kind of start doing as you go down this journey. Just start closed captioning your content, right? That one's pretty straightforward. Anytime you can attach additional resources to your content, like agenda minutes, pretty straightforward. Transcripts, alternative text, we've probably belabored. That's pretty important. And then these free tools that I mentioned are a great place to start. And then talk to your vendors. Like, do they have VPAT? Again, we touched base on this. Are there additional features or products or the feedback you get from your community? Are there things that, hey, everyone's asking for this thing, like a great thing to go to your vendors, and then think about what kind of things you guys are already doing. And then my final slide here, just in conclusion, we had a customer of ours that was audited by the DOJ. They ended up installing some new internet channels, satisfied concerns. They were in good shape. But it's an interesting story. We interviewed them. We did a podcast for it. So the government video podcast, episode 12. So you don't have to listen to them all. You can go right to that one.
Who's the client?
Salem Public Schools.
Okay.
In New Hampshire.
Got it.
Yep.
Got it.
Yep.
What triggered the audit?
It wasn't voluntary. It wasn't being proactive. So it must have been
I think it's probably
community.
It's probably a compliance audit. So what the DOJ used to do is they would go across the United States and they would call up municipalities and they'd say, you know, let's go through the list of 20 items. Like, let's check your public buildings. Let's check your check street planning. Let's check and and literally the communications is like one of the 20 items that they would do. So it isn't just like they're looking to go after peg channels or something like that. It's more like it's like standard compliance audits that they did with municipalities, and this has been going on for decades, actually.
But are they random? Are they?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think what they did, they would do clusters within states. So I think Minnesota had a bunch of them. I think Jody at Town Square was, or Inver Grove Heights was subject
City of
to.
Minneapolis did for sure.
City of Minneapolis did one. There's a bunch in Minnesota occurred. I think that happened in Hawaii about 20 years ago. There was like a series of series of audits that happened for the counties in Hawaii. So what they'll do, they had a civil rights compliance team. I don't know what's happening now, but they would basically choose clusters and they do clusters of auditing.
Sorry, I have a couple questions. So the screen reader thing, so is it, I'm not real familiar, but is it like a program, and shouldn't they be held also accountable to be ADA compliant as a tool?
The tools typically are being held compliant for ADA. I can't remember how the certification process works for the tools. For a lot of the sort of like phones, cable boxes, things like that, that does run through the FCC. The FCC has got compliance responsibility for a lot of those communications tools. I'm not sure about software.
Because, I mean, wouldn't they be required to, like, keep up, like, basically like you're talking about the description?
Yeah, and I think that's an issue particularly from the user community, because very often people will be comfortable with a tool that they work with, and it's like on a Windows platform from like 1993 or something like that. I mean, it's like, we'll see this with like folks with visual disabilities who use Drag and Talk, which was very, very rudimentary speaking tool for text, a text conversion tool, but super robust, super robust. It was really good in the 1990s when it came out, and it was running on like Windows 3.1, and then they weren't actually updating it, so it had to you'd have to have like a Windows 3.1 shell to be able to. It's kind of
true.
Yeah, I mean,
I use it as dictation software.
Yeah, I mean, so it is an issue of the user side, because you can't force a user. You don't want to be forcing a user to have to buy a new tool.
Is another kind of example just like an interpreter? Is an interpreter required to, like, why don't they just interpret better, right? I mean, like, you know what I mean? It's similar, like if you've got a screen reader, you're choosing the screen reader software.
Well, I mean, it's
kind of like
interesting.
a
It's
different-
interesting. Interpreters like doctors are typically and lawyers are self-regulating, right? So there's typically have been like a certification community.
Sure.
Yeah, there's like a certification community, hasn't been responsible. I don't think they're responsible like state boards. They're not like a chiropractor, right, or something like that. But it's, but typically there's been like there's a certification for ASL interpreters, for example. There's a certification for.
But should the requirements for that certification, like, should they be strict requirements for that addressing?
I don't know how they have been working with that question, but I would imagine that it's been popping up.
Yeah.
And then you guys are also talking about, like, with the sign language, adding the folks in that are supposed to be interpreting with the sign language. Is that something that you're gonna add maybe as an AI person doing that, where it's part of the program? Or is that?
I think there are some services for synthetic people. I am not an expert on this issue, but this question of like synthetic people for that type of language assistance, I think is happening. There's also.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
for sure happening. I just saw a demo at one of my clients' meetings, and it was amazing. They took a video like of me presenting, and they showed the English version, and then they showed me speaking French.
Yeah.
It wasn't really me; it was somebody else. But
Well, and there's actually
it was amazing.
And there's broadcast quality tools that are being developed so that you've got simultaneous translation services that will do spoken word. Now, it won't be free. You'll have to pay for it. And then the question ends up being how you mix your budget resources, the needs in your local community, and the tools that make sense. So it's like those are the things you've got to be thinking about to be coming up. I mean, we've always had to think about that anyway, to come up with solutions that worked. Right.
So my last question, sorry, I know, because all these came from what you guys are talking about. So when you were talking about now, like, just like what Rory said about, like, we get our funding from the Cable Commission. So, I guess, there's onus on us, but then also on them as well as our partner. So legally then, shouldn't we be having that in our budget request now? Should we be able, is there something that we can draft to say, this needs, like, and what Kristen was saying, we need to do this year over year, basically now? Is that something we're gonna have to fight for? And
I can speak as an advocate, not a lawyer.
Good, I can speak as a lawyer.
Okay,
Yeah.
so as an advocate, I would say you should, as a nonprofit, you're subject to ADA now. You should be assessing how you're doing approaches for people with disabilities for all of your services and determining whether or not you need like adjustable tables for editing, ramps, doors, all this other stuff. That should be just part of your planning anyway. Whether or not you are providing a government service, which is subject specifically to this, I think is going to vary case by case and community by community. So it's going to depend a lot about like what the products and services that you're providing in the local community. There's a slightly different strictness in the requirement. Title II entities have a slightly stricter responsibility than nonprofits do, but nonprofits have got the responsibility under ADA to be able to do these assessments in the first place too. Okay? So I just think it's in your interest to do that. And then if you're providing government services, the law is very clear. You can't use your nonprofit status as a dodge. So I think you've got a strong case to say we're providing these services. These are the spec'd costs that we know we need to cover, and I think that's probably part of contract negotiation. That what you'd have to have with any client, especially like if you dealt with like multiple government clients, right?
Right. Yeah, and you both have to, I mean, the commission has, I'm assuming the commission's doing some programming too. Maybe they're doing the G programming and you're doing other programming.
We're the government.
Yeah.
Access General, the employees of the Cable Commission.
Yeah. Are you the,
I'm the pay.
okay.
Well, you could,
Okay.
if you just want to ask
Then
questions.
Yeah,
and
then
we'll-
I'm gonna stay out of that completely. I'm gonna stay out of that
I'm
completely.
glad we could, yeah,
Yeah.
no, and, you know, but I think this ends up being the issue, like, I think back to my experiences in St. Paul, we did the public and the educational provision. The educational provision, there was a clear mandate that we had to be providing disability services because we're working with a school district. So if you're like working with a school district, there's like a way higher standard of like active responsibility you've got. And then we would partner with like different departments in the state government and county government and multi-county government in Minnesota. And each of them had different technical requirements for what they wanted to do to achieve their mission. And then we would build that into the contract work we did, right? So I think you have to be working with your partners to educate them about what materially they need and how you achieve it. You know, and Pete can attest to this. Like the costing of the tools, it will vary from month to month and year to year, and so I just think it's always going to be part of our conversation. It can't be just like we did this back in 2016.
Right.
We're done with the conversation. Mm-hmm. The technology is robust and will keep changing and accelerating, and I think our audiences will expect things. I think most people expect that there's captioning for a product on a television. It's just a cultural expectation now, separate from the legal obligation. So there's this question of like how you meet audience demand and expectation if you're on that platform.
Well said.
I had a question. Up until now, I've just been thinking about captioning for the government programs that we covered, and then making sure that those files are attached showing where we archive it, when it's video on demand or in an archive. It has not occurred to me how a website would have to be compliant. So you're blowing my mind a little bit now and making me freak out. So
No need to freak.
You have time.
I'm here with
You have time.
support group.
You don't have a lot of time, but you have time.
Now's the time to plan.
Yeah.
So yeah, just thinking about that. So those tools are kind of good first steps. And you talked about being able to show sort of due diligence, right? So like we are a very, very small organization. A web designer who can make sure that our web design team has the same budget as our legal team is $0. So, for laymen to be
That's
able to...
unacceptable, by the way.
I would concur, I like the liability myself. So just trying to think about how laymen could work their way through this and be in compliance with the finding would be, helpful for me.
Yeah, I think the tools out there are step one, right? Starting to talk to your vendors today and saying, knowing that you've got a little bit of runway, and saying, hey, this is where we need to be by April, who's got the date memorized? April 24th.
You're small.
Yeah.
How many residents do you serve?
6,000.
Yeah, so that's 27. April 27.
Yeah.
April 27th, 2027, I
It'll be here like that.
think. It will be,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think, to be fair to everybody, I don't think that they imagined that they'd be, should look at the small entity compliance material that Mike provides, because I think that gets to the heart of who you are. And there's how many local governments are there in the United States? It's like what?
I don't know the number.
It's like 500,000 local governments. There's it's some sort of like crazy number. So you're not alone.
So we, as our nonprofit, we contract with multiple municipalities to cover the government's proceedings. Some of them aren't even incorporated. So there's some tricky scenarios in Colorado that are worthy of extra diligence. So I want to make sure that we're covering our bases as a nonprofit beyond just, because I agree 100% with what you're saying, is beyond the compliance legally. It's about serving your community in the best way as possible, that's the most accessible as possible, and make sure everyone has a seat at the table and can read and understand what's going on in the community. So,
Well-
passion level, I'm already there, but
Well-
I'm very now concerned about the compliance issue.
Well, okay, so like, I mean, so practically, I would start thinking about how you have the conversation with local leaders.
That's what I'm thinking.
I mean, I think, what's the framework? As opposed to like, oh my God, the sky is falling, or the feds did this to us, or something like that. How do you have this framework to be thinking about providing services for folks in the community, particularly, you know, I mean, particularly there's some things like, you know, you don't think about, like the visual acuity issues within the standards on the website. Those, I think that's really quite important, but we don't talk about those disabilities very often, right? And I think if you frame that right, you're a champion.
That's what I'm thinking is like somehow maybe even hosting like a forum that has like town managers or legal teams. Permission is us as the pay channel. We kind of facilitate that conference and get everybody in the same room at the same time, talking about what needs to be done. You know, when the conversation about cost comes up, it's a lot easier to have when everybody realizes they're all stakeholders, and we're kind of the hub in the middle of that. So.
I think that's right, and if you're providing solutions rather than seeing as rather than being the problem, it's a huge thing.
Yeah, and the sooner you can get that process started, you know, the better, obviously.
Right, and I think also doing some intelligence gathering about residents in the communities that you serve, super important.
It can be a tricky conversation, though, just to be clear, because what we don't want is for, you know, there's always some knucklehead council member that is gonna say, well, just cut the video.
Right, which is actually, I think that happened in Green Bay County,
Yes.
Wisconsin.
That's where I was thinking, yeah.
And it was an excuse.
Brown
County,
yeah.
which is the home to the Packers. So as Vikings fans, we've got opinions about this community.
We thought they were done anyway.
Yeah. But it was an excuse to basically cut services. And they came up with a crazy quote from a vendor, which was more than they were doing for access provision in the first place. So it clearly was done in the spirit of, I'm happy to say this, it was done in the spirit of trying to basically get rid of the service,
Yes.
right? That's why I think it's really important for us as advocates within our community to be solution providers, partners with vendors, and then thinking about building community services, because disability advocates will also say that's an abuse of ADA, but no one's going to Green Bay and trying to reignite services for the county. You know, we can all wag our finger. I don't know if we'll get those services back ever again. And that's the thing that drives me, is like, we need to make sure that services are used and useful, and that's how you build audience. If you build audience, you build political meaning. If you build political meaning, you can build power. Otherwise, you flush it down the toilet, and once it's gone, you can't get it back. Right? So we need to be thinking about this as an opportunity to be building things.
If the town turns off their video coverage, the town's still got a website and it's got to comply. They've got to teach all of their department heads, so you've got to make graphics look like this, you've got to do alternative text.
Yep.
I'm bringing you the information here.
Yep.
This is your protection.
And to think about building
That's
that
what
part.
makes it different from the Wisconsin scenario, where that wasn't the case at the time. That happened a number of years ago now. So you're right about that. They're in the same boat, and we're helping them get into compliance.
Yeah, and I think, Rory, the issue is you've got to be seen as the trusted partner. You can't be seen as the crank who's asking for money.
We're in an area with a whole lot of special districts, just because of the way things were formed. We've got a special elected hospital district, elected rec and park district, elected fire district, elected airport board. Several of them we cover their meetings. And I expect, because they're Brown Act districts, this is going to apply to every one of them, right?
Yep. Yeah, I would. Yeah. I think that qualifies as a Title II entity under the law. I think we've run out of time. I know that these gentlemen are happy to talk with you more. We will provide you with copies of their slide decks and materials. ACM also has other materials that we can use for you. And then the other thing I'd say to you is that, you know, as the president and CEO, I'm a phone call away, so please let me know if I can be a assistance to you as you're figuring out the journey and, you know, working with our partners and our allies in terms of figuring out ways to be able to do right by the law and do right by your community.
Now, be honest with us, how many of you were rubbing that little card saying, I pray that he'd stop talking?
Stop talking, Kurt.
Anyway, thanks for your attention and joining us.
Thank you,
Yeah.
guys.
Thanks.